Have you ever walked into a room and everything changed before you spoke a single word? Not dramatically, just enough. The laughter softens, the conversations hesitate, and suddenly you feel like a disturbance. You didn't say anything unusual. You weren't hostile or loud. But something in your presence disrupted the atmosphere. And deep down, part of you knows. This happens often. They say you're too intense, that you take things too seriously, that your silence feels like judgment, that your honesty feels like attack. You start wondering if you're broken somehow, if you're just socially incompatible, emotionally out of place, or spiritually wired wrong. But what if the opposite is true? What if the reactions you provoke aren't signs of your dysfunction, but symptoms of your depth? Carl Jung believed that the unconscious reacts violently to what it refuses to integrate, which means sometimes when you're simply being yourself, you're activating something in others they don't even understand. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're awake. This isn't a script about superiority. It's about the invisible cost of being real in a world that rewards the mask. So if you've felt alienated, not because of what you've done, but because of what you are, this might explain why. These are the 13 signs your presence silently unsettles others. Not because you're difficult, but because you reflect the parts of them they've never dared to meet. Sign 13 reveals why this journey often ends in isolation. Until it doesn't. Watch until the end to find out. Sign 1. Some people don't just enter a room, they interrupt it. Even in silence, their presence disturbs something unspoken. Most social environments are held together by quiet rules. Don't go too deep. Don't name what people are avoiding. Keep everything light, predictable, safe. But the presence of someone who's done serious inner work doesn't follow those rules. They carry a kind of groundedness that disrupts emotional autopilot. Around them, the atmosphere tightens. People become self-conscious, guarded, unsure why they suddenly feel exposed. It's not because anything offensive was said. It's because their energy introduces contrast. That contrast forces others to feel things they've numbed. Grief that was buried, restlessness that was ignored, questions that were never answered. The disruption isn't loud. It's subtle, steady, and impossible to name directly. But people sense it. And when they can't explain their discomfort, they often blame the person who made them feel it. Not because that person did anything wrong, but because their presence revealed how much pretending was keeping everything in place. Sign 2. For someone grounded in psychological depth, surface-level conversation isn't just boring, it's draining. Most social talk operates on safe, familiar tracks. Weather, routines, minor complaints. The point isn't to connect, it's to maintain comfort. But for a person who values emotional truth, these exchanges feel artificial. And pretending to care about what feels hollow requires effort that quietly erodes their energy. This isn't about superiority. It's not that small talk is beneath them. It's that their nervous system is calibrated to seek what's real. When no deeper layer is available, they begin to withdraw, not out of rejection, but as a form of self-preservation. Their face might still be smiling, their words might still match the rhythm of the room, but something inside them has already left. People often sense the shift. They may interpret it as coldness or discomfort, not realizing what's actually happening. It's not that the person refuses to connect. It's that they can't bond over what isn't alive. Sign 3. People who have integrated their emotional shadow often make others feel unexpectedly exposed, even without trying. It happens most clearly through eye contact. Not the polite kind, not the kind that glances and moves on, the kind that stays, quiet, calm, and fully present. For many, that kind of gaze feels invasive, but it isn't aggressive. It's stable, unblinking, unafraid, and that's exactly why it unsettles people. Most social eye contact is a performance. It signals agreement, amusement, distraction, whatever keeps the moment moving. But someone who has done the inner work doesn't use eye contact to perform. They use it to witness. And when others are met with that kind of attention, it often activates something uncomfortable, a sense that their usual masks aren't working. Some will look away immediately. Others will fill the silence with nervous laughter or over-explaining because they can feel what's happening. They aren't just being seen, they're being reflected. And for those who haven't made peace with who they are, that reflection feels like confrontation. Sign 4. When someone no longer depends on approval to define themselves, social scripts begin to break down around them. In most environments, behavior follows an invisible script: how to greet, how to flatter, when to laugh, when to agree. These scripts protect people from awkwardness. They make interactions predictable. But a person rooted in self-awareness doesn't rely on them. They move from presence, not performance. And that quiet refusal to play along makes others uncertain. The usual cues stop working. Charm feels forced. Power loses its leverage. Even humor can fall flat. This kind of person doesn't interrupt the flow by speaking loudly or taking over. They interrupt it by not participating in what's false. And when that happens, the people around them are forced into a moment they didn't plan for. They must improvise. They must decide whether to become more real or to retreat. That discomfort is often blamed on the one who caused it. But the real tension isn't personal. It's structural, a natural reaction to someone who refuses to keep pretending. Sign 5. Some individuals carry a presence that acts like a tuning fork for buried emotion. Not because they say the right thing, but because they exist without avoidance. In their company, others often feel an unexpected pull toward emotional honesty. Memories surface, defenses soften. Grief that had been pushed aside for years begins to rise without explanation. This doesn't happen through deliberate guidance or therapeutic language. It happens because the integrated person is no longer afraid of what lives beneath the surface. And that quiet acceptance gives others permission, often unconsciously, to lower their own guard. But permission is not always welcomed. For someone who has built their life around emotional control, that sudden access to deeper feeling can feel threatening. They may retreat, change the subject, or even become irritated without knowing why. It's not the person they are reacting to. It's the emotional territory that person's presence awakens in them. When someone who has processed their own sorrow enters the room, the sorrow in others begins to stir. And not everyone is ready to feel it. Sign 6. There are people whose presence shifts power dynamics the moment they enter a space, not by force, but by refusing to seek permission. Most authority structures depend on subtle compliance. Unspoken rules about who defers, who leads, who gets to speak uninterrupted. But someone who carries inner stability doesn't automatically yield to these rules. They don't challenge them either. They simply exist outside of them. That calm refusal to shrink creates tension. Supervisors become uneasy. Dominant personalities talk faster, explain more, or lose their usual confidence. Those accustomed to controlling the room feel something they rarely encounter: resistance that isn't rebellion, just independence. It's not posturing, it's not attitude. It's the quiet signal of someone who does not need validation to be grounded. And for those who build identity through control, that kind of presence is difficult to manage. Not because it's disruptive, but because it makes their authority feel unnecessary. Sign 7. When someone no longer accepts what is common as automatically valid, they create quiet tension in the systems around them. Most people don't question what they've inherited: social roles, life goals, daily routines. They accept structure as truth and normalcy as proof of correctness. But an individual who lives from internal alignment doesn't respond to that kind of consensus. They don't attack it. They simply don't participate. That refusal to play along with assumed values often feels like criticism, even when nothing is said. Their choices, what they prioritize, how they spend time, what they refuse to chase, send a signal. There are other ways to live, other measures of meaning, other definitions of success. And for people who are heavily invested in external validation, that quiet divergence feels like judgment. Not because it is, but because it exposes how much of their life was built on default settings. This type of person rarely tries to convert others, but their presence alone invites questions most are not prepared to answer. Sign 8. Psychologically integrated individuals often become targets for projection, not because of what they do, but because of what they reflect. Every person carries traits they deny, disown, or suppress. These unclaimed parts form the shadow, the pieces of the self that feel unacceptable, weak, or threatening. And when someone meets a person who lives with visible self-acceptance, that shadow looks for a place to land. Often it lands on the one who seems least reactive. They may be accused of arrogance when they're simply quiet, labeled intimidating when they're just self-contained, blamed for rejection when they've only set a boundary. It's not personal, it's psychological displacement. When people aren't ready to face what lives in them, they often assign those traits to someone who seems emotionally whole, not because they believe it fully, but because it gives them temporary relief from seeing themselves too clearly. In this way, integrated individuals often become the villain in stories that were never theirs to begin with. Sign 9. Some individuals create tension simply by responding differently than expected. In most interactions, there are unspoken emotional rules: how to react, when to agree, what feelings to display. Empathy is often measured not by presence, but by matching tone, sadness with sadness, outrage with outrage, enthusiasm with enthusiasm. But a person grounded in inner clarity doesn't mimic emotion to maintain connection. They stay present, but they stay centered. And that quiet refusal to escalate, dramatize, or perform empathy unsettles people who rely on emotional mirroring to feel understood. In moments where others expect shared outrage, they remain calm. In conversations designed to stir pity, they offer grounded listening instead of sympathy. This isn't detachment, it's discernment. But for those who depend on emotional agreement to feel seen, this response feels like rejection. They may say the person is cold, distant, unfeeling, when in truth, they're simply not confused by borrowed emotion. Because once someone has made peace with their own inner world, they no longer need to join someone else's storm to prove they care. Sign 10. There are people who unintentionally become containers for the emotional collapse of others. In moments of crisis, unexpected confessions, quiet breakdowns, sudden admissions, others seem to instinctively turn to them. Not because they've offered help, not because they've positioned themselves as caregivers, but because their presence communicates safety, even when they say nothing. This is not about being nurturing or soft. It's about being solid. Those who have metabolized their own suffering tend to radiate an energy of containment. Others sense it and lean in, sometimes without warning, sometimes without boundaries. Strangers begin to open up within minutes. Friends bypass small talk and go straight to disclosure. Coworkers, acquaintances, even passers-by detect something stable enough to hold their unraveling. But what rarely gets noticed is the cost. While others feel permission to break down, the one holding space often receives little in return. They absorb pain but are rarely asked about their own. They listen deeply but remain unseen. Over time, this creates a subtle loneliness, surrounded by vulnerability but rarely included in it. Sign 11. There are individuals who attract intense connection quickly, but just as quickly, they're left behind. In the early moments, the bond feels undeniable. Someone feels deeply seen, perhaps for the first time. They share secrets, express gratitude, speak of resonance and recognition. It feels real because in that moment, it is. But when that emotional exposure settles in, something changes. The person who opened up begins to pull back. They stop responding. They become distant or defensive. Sometimes they rewrite the connection as inappropriate or overwhelming. Other times they vanish without explanation. This withdrawal isn't rooted in manipulation. It's a reaction to depth, being seen too clearly, especially by someone who isn't demanding anything in return, can feel destabilizing. It breaks the illusion that certain parts of the self can remain hidden forever. And for those not ready to live with that kind of self-awareness, the easiest solution is to retreat. The result is a strange emotional pattern, intense closeness, followed by silence. Not because of betrayal, but because the intimacy was real enough to feel dangerous. Sign 12. Some individuals read a room before anyone says a word. The tension in someone's shoulders, a glance that lingers too long, the way silence falls between certain people. These details don't escape them. They arrive all at once as sensation. It's not supernatural. It's sensitivity refined through inner work. Those who've integrated their emotional landscape often become highly attuned to what others suppress. They notice what isn't said. They feel what hasn't been resolved. They register shifts in energy long before those around them realize anything has changed. In many cases, they know the mood of a space before they even cross the doorway. This awareness is powerful, but also exhausting, because it doesn't turn off. They may find themselves absorbing feelings that don't belong to them, walking away from conversations burdened by someone else's grief, confusion, or anxiety, not because anyone asked them to carry it, but because their nervous system is always listening. And when no one else notices what they've picked up, that emotional weight becomes isolating. Sign 13. Some individuals move through the world with a sense that they were never meant to fully belong to it. This feeling doesn't come from trauma or exclusion. It comes from orientation. While most are driven by identity, by roles, validation, status, these individuals are pulled by something deeper, the quiet force of inner truth. Carl Jung called this the call of the self, not the personality, not the image, but the totality of who a person is becoming. Those who respond to that call begin to live differently. They step outside inherited norms. They detach from roles they were expected to play. They lose interest in performance and grow more loyal to presence. Over time, they start to see what others don't see. Not because they're superior, because they're no longer defending against the obvious. But that clarity comes at a cost. It makes conversations harder. It makes belonging feel conditional. And it often places them at the edge of their communities, watching others repeat patterns they've already outgrown. This isn't loneliness in the usual sense. It's the quiet ache of existing outside familiar maps. They don't fit because they're not here to fit. They're here to carry something. Not an answer, but a question. What if there's more than this? Now that you've seen all 13 signs, you might recognize a pattern that goes deeper than social tension or emotional sensitivity. This isn't just about how others react. It's about what your presence represents to them and to the structure of the world they've built around avoidance. These signs aren't quirks. They're signals, proof of integration, evidence that you've moved through layers most people won't touch. And because of that, you carry an energy that doesn't accommodate illusions. You don't need to speak to make people shift. You don't need to confront to create pressure. Your alignment itself becomes the challenge, because it asks others to see what they've spent years looking away from. So the silence, the distance, the withdrawal, it's not rejection of you. It's resistance to what you've resolved that others still carry in fragments. That resistance isn't personal, but how you interpret it is. Because this path won't come with applause. There will be no crowd waiting at the finish line. Just clarity, just peace, just the rare, quiet strength of being someone who no longer needs to pretend. And now that you understand what your presence really does, will you keep dimming it just to keep others comfortable?